In Unit 1, we explored why participatory systems mapping matters when dealing with complex or wicked problems. We saw that building shared understanding among diverse actors is essential for making sense of complexity. In this unit, we move from the why to the how. How does participatory systems mapping actually unfold in practice? How can facilitators navigate different knowledge, interests, and values? And how can we address power asymmetries in divergent perspectives? To answer these questions, we will draw on examples from the ENPhasis project to illustrate how participatory mapping processes are facilitated in real-world settings. Before we look at the process itself, it is useful to clarify that the system mapping can be understood in 3 different ways. First, it can be used as a tool. For example, a causal loop diagram or a value network map, used to visualize relationships in a system. Second, it can be used as a participatory event, for example, a workshop, where stakeholders collectively build a map. But remember, in most real-world transformation efforts, systems mapping is actually a process. That means a sequence of participatory activities that unfold over time. A process because societal challenges rarely become clear in a single workshop. In fact, participatory systems mapping unfolds iteratively. In practice, stakeholders come together to explore the system, reflect on new insights, revise their understanding, and gradually identify possible directions for coordinated action. In this sense, the map is not fixed. It evolves as participants learn together. We have broken down the process in 4 cycles. First, sense-making. Participants work together to understand the system, the key issues, relationships, and feedback dynamics. Causal loop diagrams and value network maps, as you may recall from Module 2, are useful tools here. Second, envisioning. They explore how the system could evolve differently and how desirable futures might look like. They identify possible interventions or strategies and reflect on how combinations of actions can together change the system. Third, experimenting. Actors taking distributed action to generate the desired effects. And fourth, assessing, or self-assessing, whether the effects described in the envisioning phase are actually achieved or not. But these phases don't occur in a linear way. Instead, they form an iterative learning cycle. In ENPhasis, we applied participatory systems mapping in 10 European case studies to determine locally grounded transformation pathways towards sustainable farming systems. We worked with diverse stakeholders, including farmers, businesses, policymakers, and civil society organizations, to develop theories of change for every case. A theory of change is a roadmap explaining how desired change is expected to happen in a specific context. The participatory process unfolded in 3 broad phases. First, pre-workshop preparation. This involved identifying relevant stakeholders, inviting them to participate, and creating the conditions for meaningful dialogue. Second, the workshop process itself, where most of the participatory mapping took place. During these workshops, participants engaged in 2 key cycles we introduced earlier. The first was sense-making. First, orientate. Participants developed and validated a shared representation of the current situation, yielding a causal loop diagram and an actor map. Second, prioritize. They identified key leverage points in the system, here in the causal loop diagram. The second cycle was envisioning. With 3, strategize. Participants explored future systems configurations and designed interventions to influence behaviors. And 4, act and influence. They reflected on possible short-term actions and how these might influence broader system change. In ENPhasis, the process focused mainly on these sense-making and envisioning cycles. The latter cycles of experimenting and assessing, where actors implement actions and evaluate their own outcomes, were beyond the scope of the project. The process also continued after the workshop. In this post-workshop phase, the research team worked to translate and synthesize the knowledge generated during these sessions. First, synthesize and recast. Insights from the discussions were combined to articulate possible change pathways, including short, medium, and long-term outcomes. Second, evaluate and enhance. These pathways were shared again with stakeholders to refine strategies and consider possible unintended consequences. And finally, report and feedback. Results were documented and shared with the participants and with the broader stakeholder community. This post-workshop work is essential. It ensures that the knowledge produced during participatory mapping becomes useful beyond the workshop itself and can inform future action and learning. We will illustrate this in Unit 3 with the elaboration of a European-level systems map and theory of change. A key practical question in participatory systems mapping is who should participate? Selecting participants is not just a logistical task. It is a strategic choice. Ideally, participants represent different parts of the system, including actors who influence the problem, are affected by it, or hold key knowledge about it. The goal is not necessarily to include everyone, but to ensure that important perspectives are present in the conversation. In the German case on animal welfare in pig supply chains, both conventional and organic farmers were invited. In the Swiss case on biodiversity protection, participants included farmers, advisors, farmer unions, and public administration, ensuring expertise on biodiversity management on agricultural land. But market actors and consumers were not included because they currently play only a limited role in the system, and including them would have made the process significantly more complex. Another important challenge concerns power and representation. Not all voices are heard equally in these processes. Some participants may speak more, be more confident, or hold more authority. This does not mean that quieter voices are less valuable or less insightful. If we ignore this, we risk reproducing existing inequalities within the mapping process itself, as power dynamics in a group determines whose knowledge shapes the map. Power can operate in many ways. Some actors hold visible decision-making authority. Others influence the process more subtly, through expertise, institutional legitimacy, or control over resources. In some cases, actors who are not even present can still influence how others behave, or what can be openly discussed. Addressing power imbalances is therefore a core task of facilitation. Facilitators need to actively create safe spaces and favorable conditions where diverse voices can contribute. In practice, this means deliberately inviting quieter participants to share their views, being attentive to who speaks and who does not, structuring discussions to avoid domination by a single actor, using smaller group discussions to ensure wider participation, or collecting written individual feedback, or even anonymous feedback. For example, in one emphasis workshop, one participant spoke at a very abstract meta level that others struggled to follow and took up a lot of speaking time. Facilitators translated his contributions and occasionally limited his speaking time to maintain balanced participation. The goal is not to eliminate differences, but to ensure the process reflects a diversity of perspectives, not only the most powerful ones. But this is not always easy to do. In some cultural or historical contexts, for example, where there is a history of domination or exclusion, certain groups may not feel comfortable speaking openly. In such cases, facilitators must carefully consider whether different actors should always be in the same room. When diverse perspectives come together, disagreement is almost inevitable. Participants may disagree about how the problem should be defined, what causes it, or which solutions are desirable. This is not a failure of the process. It is actually a necessary and often productive stage. Participatory co-design processes typically involve cycles of divergence and convergence. During divergence phases, the goal is to open up perspectives. Participants are encouraged to share different interpretations of the system and challenge assumptions. Facilitators encourage the expression of diverse viewpoints in order to reveal hidden dynamics, conflicting priorities, and blind spots. Divergence helps expand the collective understanding of the system. At some points, however, the process also needs convergence. Convergence does not mean eliminating disagreements. Rather, it means identifying temporary shared directions that allow the group to move forward. As a facilitator, this might involve guiding participants to identify a small number of key leverage points, or a set of possible interventions, or potential areas of collaboration. These agreements often remain provisional and can be revisited later as the learning continues. In many situations, full consensus is neither possible nor necessary. Instead, facilitators aim for constructive alignment. Actors may still disagree on certain issues, but they may still coordinate around shared actions. This allows progress without forcing artificial harmony. Balancing divergence and convergence is therefore one of the most important skills of participatory facilitation. For example, in the German pig value chain case, conventional and organic pig farmers had different production models, but they still converged around shared goals, such as improving animal welfare, reducing emissions, and strengthening the regional value chain. Let us now look at a few practical lessons from the ENPhaSys experience. These are not technical tips on drawing maps. They are lessons about the process itself. The first lesson is that participatory mapping works best when it responds to a real demand from the field, not only to a research question designed by the researchers. Stakeholders engage much more actively when the issue directly matters to them. In ENPhaSys, participation was stronger when the process addressed an existing concern, opportunity, or challenge already recognized by actors in the field. A second lesson concerns relationships and trust. Participatory mapping works much better when facilitators already have a strong relationship with stakeholders. For example, in the dairy farming case, coordinated by IDEL in northern France, participation was strong because the process built on an existing project and long-standing collaboration with farmers. Stakeholders joined because they knew the process would generate useful insights for them. Similarly, in Serbia, participation benefited from prior relationships and accountability towards local actors. By contrast, where relationships were new or weak, sustaining participation proved much more difficult. A third lesson is that power dynamics often begin before the workshop starts. They emerge through the way a case is framed and through decisions about who gets invited. In ENPhaSys, some cases mainly involved actors already connected to the case study coordinator. This made participation easier, but it also shaped which perspectives entered the discussion. For instance, in some cases, business actors were largely absent, not necessarily because they lack interest, but because they were not part of the initial framing or invitation network. This highlights an important facilitation question. Not only who should be in the room, but also who is missing and why. A final lesson concerns divergence and conflict. As we know now, in complex socio-ecological systems, actors often have different interests, values, and priorities. In ENPhaSys, some case study coordinators reported that bringing all actors into the same room was not always possible. In those situations, they organized separate sessions with different groups, for example, business actors and public actors. Where facilitators had strong social capital and trusted relationships, They were sometimes able to bring actors together and work through tensions. So, a practical guideline is do not force convergence too early. Sometimes, separate spaces are necessary before meaningful dialogue can happen. So, to conclude, participatory systems mapping works best when facilitators pay attention to 6 key principles. First, start from a real issue that matters in the field. Second, build on existing relationships and accountability. Third, make sure participants gain something from the process. Fourth, be reflexive about who is invited, who is missing, and how the issue is framed. Fifth, treat divergence as part of the process, not as a failure. And finally, address power dynamics by creating inclusive spaces where diverse perspectives can genuinely shape the discussion. Participatory systems mapping is therefore not only about producing a map. It is about creating the conditions for learning, dialogue, and collective experimentation. And when done well, these processes can help actors move from shared understanding towards coordinated strategies for change. That is exactly what we will explore in the next unit: what participatory systems mapping can enable in practice, and how systems maps can support experimentation, collaboration, and transformation across scales.